Hello everyone and welcome back to another series of What If videos, and this time it's kind of another what if DC and Marvel switched places, but in a more literal way than the loose way I did before. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm pretty much going to go movie by movie or show by show and have an opposite counterpart to that movie or show, but from the other company. For instance, Iron Man will have its DC counterpart, while Man of Steel will have its Marvel counterpart, and go off from there. Some will be a literal character ripoff, as the two companies ripped off each other all the time, while some will have more of a loose counterpart if I couldn't find one that fit, or if it didn't make sense in terms of building a universe-wise. When I talk about each film, I will explain my decision. While the directors and writers remain the same, the cast of certain films would change to fit the counterpart film's characters and the tone of each other's respective universes, DC being now light and fun, while Marvel is now dark and depressing. However, if I think it fits, some will be kept the same and have a counterpart character. With that, this video will cover the DC side of things for phases 1 through 3. I thought I could do it all, but it was way more than I thought. For the first film of the DC Cinematic Universe, which would be the Iron Man counterpart, is Batman in 2008. Now, I know there are probably better counterparts. This one fit the best, and I don't think it's a bad fit either. Both are orphan billionaires who use their money to fight crime in their respective cities with tons of gadgets and are considered some of the smartest men in the world, with the exception that Batman didn't create a suit of armor, depending on the version and continuity, and he isn't a raging douche canoe. Let's move on to casting. There was a Screen Rant article a while back that had some good counterparts for each other's universes that would fit the other's tones. With this, the Batman counterpart I thought was a good choice was Kyle Chandler. He could do the darker side, but still fit into the tone that this version of the DCCU would be. With his age, I would want him to have some years on him, so he has had some history in this world, unlike Iron Man with its origin story. Now we get to the rest of the cast. First is the villain. Now, Obadiah Stane doesn't really have a good counterpart to do, so I thought to do two and essentially split the character. One villain would be the friend of Bruce, who would then go down the path of villainy, while the other would represent the brains of the operation, as well as being Bruce's antithesis and the muscle in the third act showdown. With this, I picked Harvey Dent, who would become Two-Face, and then Bane. Two-Face would be played by Dougray Scott, while Bane would be played by someone like Javier Bardem, or get a wrestler to play him like Rey Mysterio, depending on what would fit better for the time. Then I would have Terrence Howard play Lucius Fox, and then Gwyneth Paltrow playing Silver St. Cloud. Obviously, you would have to have Alfred as well, and since no actor really fits him, he would be played by Jeffrey Rush, which was also in the article. For the second film, which would be the Incredible Hulk counterpart, is Martian Manhunter from 2008. This one is certainly a looser one, but no DC counterpart to the Hulk would work since most of them are villains, like Solomon Grundy or, to a much lesser extent, Doomsday. And the only other one I found was a forgotten 90s character called Loose Cannon, but that wouldn't work in building a universe. Since this took place before the New 52, Martian Manhunter would still be a founding member of the Justice League, and he is a green guy who can change his body, so I thought that would work for this. So for our titular character, I thought that Mark Ruffalo would be the best choice for John Jones, even though he wasn't in the original film, because I think he would fit the character the best in this universe. Meanwhile, Edward Norton I think would be better suited as a villain, who I would simply make Ma'alefak Jones, since Abomination is pretty much bad Hulk, while Ma'alefak is bad Martian Manhunter. For other characters, Liv Tyler would probably be Jones's partner, Diane Mead, while for a big bad counterpart for General Ross, the perfect fit would be General Sam Lane, as both can be villains but also good guys and have a daughter whose love interest is a superhero. However, I can't exactly make it so that Lois Lane is fucking Martian Manhunter, as that wouldn't work, but Sam Lane is too perfect to have, and I still think it would fit his character to go after Martian Manhunter, as well as opening the world a bit, since that would tease Superman as well. Next is an easy one, as that is simply a sequel with Iron Man 2, and it would be Batman 2 in 2010. Nothing to really explain here specifically in terms of the characters, since Batman is already established. However, what I did want to add is that I decided to put Robin in here. I'm splitting characters again, and while War Machine isn't a sidekick to Iron Man, it's another hero that is attributed to that family, and I think it would make sense to introduce the most famous member of the Bat family with Robin, so that's what I'm doing here. However, since this is more along the lines of a veteran Bruce, he would be the Tim Drake incarnation. Now we move on to casting. First things first, Don Cheadle would be replacing Terrence Howard as Lucius Fox, just like what happened in real life. For Robin, I think a good choice would be Logan Lerman. I think he would fit with the tone, and the age was right for the time. Now for the villains. Justin Hammer is kind of a goofy antithesis to Tony and reminds him of what he could be if he continued down his path and didn't become a hero. I think someone who could fit the bill in terms of using their mind for villainy rather than heroism would be the Riddler. Plus, Sam Rockwell would just be perfect casting for the Riddler. Then we have the secondary antagonist, and it's a simple revenge plot. There isn't really a character that fits as someone who would want revenge on Batman, but I think someone who could fit in terms of inventing his own weaponry to commit crimes would probably be Firefly, and I think Mickey Rourke could do the role just fine. Then finally we have the Black Widow role, and while she doesn't have a counterpart to fit perfectly in terms of someone who worked with the main hero and threads the line of good and evil, would be Catwoman. With that, I think Charlize Theron would fit the role the best for the time. I am aware that there is a more literal counterpart with Black Cat, but since Black Cat hasn't shown up in a live-action movie, I think this would fit. Next, we have the Thor counterpart with Wonder Woman in 2011. Again, not a perfect counterpart, but I think it works because both are based in mythology and wield magical weapons. Plus, I can't think of anyone else that would be better in all honesty. With that, let's move on to casting. Since she was a big favorite to play the character for many years, might as well go with Cobie Smulders for Wonder Woman. Then for Steve Trevor, I think a good choice would be Zachary Levi, as he was in the second and third Thor films, so might as well use him here, and I think he would be a good fit for the DCCU Steve Trevor. Then for the villain, it would obviously be Ares. I don't think Tom Hiddleston would be a good fit for specifically Ares. I would want someone who is a bit more intimidating, like Ray Stevenson. I think he would have been really good. Then finally for Hippolyta, Rene Russo would fit, as it would be a similar role to Frigga. Not really a ton of supporting characters for Wonder Woman in all honesty. Then we have the Captain America counterpart with Superman in 2011. This is mainly coming from a morality point of view, as their morals align considerably, as well as the fact they wear red and blue, so it makes sense. And at one point, they fought for the American way. Boom. There you go. In terms of casting, I think Matt Bomer would be a great Superman for more of that MCU style. I mean, he would have made a great Superman regardless, but specifically for MCU stuff, I think Bomer would fit very well. However, I do think that Haley Atwell would be a great Lois Lane. So there you go. In terms of the villain, Red Skull is the most popular Captain America villain, so might as well have the most popular Superman villain with Lex Luthor. I know, lame, but it just makes sense. With this, Hugo Weaving, I think, would be a good choice for Lex Luthor. In terms of Tommy Lee Jones as a supporting character, he would be perfect for Perry White. Last characters to use actors from the film would be Neil McDonough as Pa Kent and Natalie Dormer as Mercy Graves. Then for some of the other characters, I would have Ansel Elgort as Jimmy Olsen and Julianne Moore as Martha Kent. Moving on. Then for the Avengers counterpart is obviously Justice League in 2012. Big team that combines all the heroes. This should be the most obvious and the most universally accepted out of all of these. While Justice League had more bite to it at the time than Avengers, when they were introduced in the comics that is, they really are the best course of action. So obviously, Matt Bomer, Kyle Chandler, Cobie Smulders, and Mark Ruffalo would return as their respective characters. In terms of the rest of the Justice League, we would have Chris Evans as the Hal Jordan Green Lantern, Ben Whishaw as the Barry Allen Flash, and Garrett Hedlund as Aquaman. Then for the first big bad, it is a bit difficult because there isn't really something close to Loki in terms of a Justice League villain. Ares hasn't really fought the Justice League like that, so I think a good equivalent would probably be Starro the Conqueror. Not necessarily character-wise, but in terms of what brought the team together in the original comics. It was Loki in Avengers number 1, and then in Brave and the Bold number 28, it was Starro. So if we're following what was done in terms of that comic book accuracy of the villain that brought the team together, I think Starro would be the best course of action. I don't know if they really have a voice. I know they didn't in the Suicide Squad, but if they did, because I think some iterations do, I do think that Tom Hiddleston would probably be good for that. Then another easy counterpart for Iron Man 3 is, Batman 3 in 2013. Another simple one because it is purely a sequel and it will be pretty easy from here on out because a lot of them are simply sequels. So let's move on. In this case, we would have Kyle Chandler, Jeffrey Rush, Logan Lerman, and Don Cheadle returning. Now, it was a bit tough on deciding who the main villain would be, considering that the Mandarin is probably Iron Man's most popular villain and greatest nemesis. I think in that sense, Joker would probably be the best based on those grounds alone. However, a more accurate counterpart to the Mandarin as a character would be Ra's al Ghul. You could even still get Ben Kingsley to play him. So what I will do is simply split the character like what I did before with the first film. Since this movie is home to one of the most infamous twists in the MCU, it could be that it seems like Ra's al Ghul is the one manipulating events, but the twist is he was just a lackey for the Joker, who would be played by Viggo Mortensen. It probably wouldn't get as much hate, but still a good amount. Now, in terms of the Maya Hansen role, you could honestly make both Talia al Ghul or Harley Quinn work. Talia would make a bit more sense on the grounds that she and Bruce have history as a couple, as Maya and Tony did in the film. But Maya was a partner of the twist villain, who would be Joker in this case, so because of that, Quinn would make more sense. Since I'm the architect of this universe and I fucking hate Harley Quinn with a burning passion, I am going to make an executive decision and just make it Talia and have her be played by Morena Baccarin. Next up is another sequel with the Thor the Dark World counterpart, Wonder Woman the Sorceress. Another sequel, this time for Wonder Woman. There isn't really a ton to add, so let's move on to casting. You could probably guess from the title that the villain this time around would be Cersei. Since Malekith seems to be heavily steeped in magic, I thought that the best course of action would be to make Cersei the villain, and she would be played by Angelina Jolie. Ironically, not the actual Cersei in the MCU, but I think she would be a good Cersei in general. It just fits that she is part of the MCU as well. In terms of any additional characters, I think you could add some of Wonder Woman's supporting characters, despite having very little. I think Etta Candy could be added, played by Kat Dennings, Vanessa Capitelis, played by Natalie Portman, and Barbara Minerva, played by Cate Blanchett. Then, for the Captain America the Winter Soldier counterpart, Superman, the Kryptonian General. Another sequel, and for Superman. Let's get into it. So it's pretty obvious that the villain this time around would be General Zod. He doesn't technically fit for the Winter Soldier character. I do have a more accurate counterpart later down the line, but I thought Kryptonian General deriving from Winter Soldier was kind of funny, and it just kind of fit the best in terms of a villain, as Zod has a similar power set to the hero like Winter Soldier to Captain America, as well as having some sort of personal history with the hero. I think a good MCU-esque version would be John Hamm. Not only do I believe he could be intimidating in his own way, he does offer something more in the line with the MCU style. Then for Ursa, she would be played by Scarlett Johansson. Then we get to Falcon's character, and I think the perfect counterpart would be Hawkman. It is simply the basis of guys with wings who can fly, but hey, I think it still works. He would be played by Jake Gyllenhaal. Then with everything going back to Krypton, Supergirl would be teased and she would be played by Katherine Newton. I would also add some supporting characters like Sebastian Stan as Steve Lombard and Anthony Mackie as Ron Troop. Then of course all the other supporting cast would return. Oh, I also wanted to add Jor-El in a flashback sequence, and I think maybe Robert Redford could probably do that role rather well. Then here is certainly a big one with the Guardians of the Galaxy counterpart, Omega Men. Now this one was really tough because none of the equivalents I could find were really all that great. I originally had Challengers of the Unknown here, but those fit into more of the DC version of the Fantastic Four, and since we're finally getting the Fantastic Four in the MCU, I decided to save them for that and use something else here. There were a couple teams I found when I looked up the equivalent of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and this was one of the many I found. There were some others like Legion that could have fit, but I feel like Omega Men fit the best, even though the Guardians are more vigilantes while Omega Men are freedom fighters. But let's get into who's who and casting. Now for the Guardians of the Galaxy, they went with the reboot team from 2008 as they were more popular and more people were aware of them. However, in this instance, the founding members from 1981 fit better than the members from the newer teams in terms of better counterparts for our characters. So we need to have alternatives for Star-Lord, Gamora, Rocket, Groot, and Drax. These aren't going to be perfect, but the best ones I could do. Just hang in there. I think Star-Lord's counterpart would be Primus, mainly in looks because he's humanoid, has red hair, and uses space pistols. You could give him his powers or not, since that's the character, might as well use them, right? He would be played by Chris Pratt. Then for Gamora, the best counterpart I could find was Callista, even though she doesn't really fit the character. The only equivalencies I could find was that she is a love interest for Primus, they eventually marry, she is a woman, and she is among the best in what she can do, which is sorcery instead of assassinating people. She would be played by Zoe Saldana. Then for Rocket, again, very loose equivalent with Schlagen. Purely on the grounds he is an engineer and so is Rocket. He would be played by Doug Jones. Then for Groot, I would pick Tigor, as he is the last of his species and so is Groot. He would be played by Vin Diesel. Then finally for Drax, the best one that fit, ironically, was a character named Brute, as he is a big hulking figure with super strength, kinda like Drax. He would also be played by Dave Bautista. Then finally for the villain, they only really have one, and that's the Viceroy, who is head of the Vegas system where they are all from. However, there was a character that was essentially a lesser villain who was Harry Hokum, so he would be more appropriate as the Ronin equivalent. Again, this is one of the looser counterparts, but this is the best I could do. Then for the Avengers Age of Ultron counterpart is Justice League Amazo in 2015. Another sequel, let's get into the casting. Again, this is more of a looser counterpart, but Amazo is a robot created by a scientist, just like Ultron. I know Ultron was designed to help while Amazo was always designed to be a bad guy. It still works the best, I think. And you could meld some ideas together, like maybe similar to the movie we got, the inventor is changed to Bruce, and it sort of mixes in aspects of Tower of Babel with him creating Brother Eye, and it's used through Amazo. Although instead of using the Justice League weaknesses against them, they are using it against Amazo in the final fight. But it does, again, bring up those Tower of Babel aspects into the film. But it doesn't split up the League like it does in Tower of Babel. In terms of casting, I think James Spader would still fit, but just like Ultron, he would be more robotic than the android shown in the comics. In terms of the characters added into this film, there isn't really a good equivalent for the Maximoff twins. The only thing I could really do was simply take those characters' power sets and attribute them here. Scarlet Witch's closest counterpart would probably be Zatanna, at least more in a comic way, since Scarlet Witch in the comics is like an actual witch rather than grab bag of weird shit like it is in the movies. She would be played by Liz Gillies. I had two ideas for Quicksilver's counterpart. Either use the DC version of Quicksilver with Max Mercury in a literal sort of way, or use the Wally West Flash, and the person that gets killed saving someone is Barry Allen's Flash. If I had to choose, I think I would go for Wally West because I think there is more story potential there. He is the more well-liked Flash, and I feel like there would be more emotional impact to have one of the original members of the Justice League die than just some rando we just met. He would be played by Tom Holland. Then I decided to have a Hawkeye counterpart and just have Green Arrow inserted here. Since Hawkeye is one of the more obvious ripoffs of a character, I thought I'd add Green Arrow played by Paul Wesley. Then for Vision, the closest thing I could come up with in terms of an equivalent is Cyborg. Since at this point we would have been knee-deep in the New 52 and he is an original member in that continuity, I think it makes sense to add him here. Plus, as I said, closest equivalent I could really do. He would be played by John Boyega. Now for the AntMan counterpart, we have Adam in 2015. I felt that this one was one of the easier counterparts to do because of how obvious it is. I don't know if Ant-Man was a ripoff of Adam, but I mean the characters' debuts were a year apart in terms of Pym and Palmer, so it's probably more than just a coincidence. But whatever the case may be, this was definitely one of the easier counterparts, as I said, especially since at this point we could do the original hero mentor, Ray Palmer, tutoring the second hero to take the mantle, Ryan Choi. I know Adam Cray was technically the second version of the shrinking version of Adam, but he wasn't substantial enough and Ryan Choi is a bit more popular. So in this case, I think Michael Douglas could be a good Ray Palmer and then have this version of Ryan Choi be more like the pre-rebirth version to fit into the Scott Lang role better. He would be played by John Cho. Then for the villain using the same powers as the hero, the best counterpart would be Dwarf Star and he would still be played by Corey Stoll. Hawkman would make a cameo in the film, like the Falcon cameo in Ant-Man. Next up is the Captain America Civil War counterpart, and it's certainly a strange one, and a very big and epic one. Superman, the Technus Imperative, in 2016. This one was a goddamn struggle to come up with because there really isn't a proper DC counterpart to Civil War. Since the movie Civil War was simply made just to combat BVS, I was just going to make this Batman vs. Superman and that's it. But I thought, might as well try to adapt a story that could be similar to Civil War. A bunch of storylines came up, and the biggest one was, of course, Kingdom Come, as it was essentially Civil War but done before, and good. But the last thing I would want is to whittle that down and have it become a boring and sanitized version of such a great story, and the lack of history in regards to those characters would make it suffer. Then another one was Identity Crisis, since it kinda has similar themes to Civil War, and both original comics were ass garbage, from what I've heard. Then another one was Tower of Babel, but more focused on characters being against each other rather than overcoming their weaknesses and defeating Ra's al Ghul. But since I already used that for the Justice League Amazo film, I didn't want to do that again. Luckily, one of my best friends is a comic book encyclopedia, so I asked him. He told me about a story called The Technus Imperative, and with some major tweaks, I thought that would fit, so we're doing that here. Due to the fact that it was originally the JLA versus Titans, I decided to just have a random grab bag group of heroes pitted against each other, just like Civil War, as well as Superman serving as the main protagonist for obvious reasons, and him siding with the heroes to save Cyborg instead of him being against it like in the actual comic. I'm not gonna get into the technicals of this story because there is just way too much to explain. I'll leave a link in the description which summarizes it, so if you really care that much, watch that and then come back here. The group of heroes will obviously be headed by Superman, who wants to try and save everyone, and Batman, who thinks shutting down what Cyborg has become will save the world. On Superman's side is Hawkman, Green Arrow, Zatanna, Atom, and the Flash. On Batman's side is Wonder Woman, Catwoman, Robin, Aquaman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, and in a much smaller role, General Sam Lane, so you have that Thaddeus Ross equivalent. I tried to have proper counterparts for each, which was shown on screen, but there were a couple where I thought that would betray their characters, like the Flash. There will also be a bunch of heroes that were showcased in earlier films, but finally showcased here. So for additional heroes on Superman's side are Arsenal, played by Ross Lynch, Black Canary, played by Catherine Winnick, Bumblebee, played by Hannah John Kamen, Donna Troy, played by Haley Steinfeld, Starfire, played by Teyonah Parris, Captain Marvel Jr., played by Josh Peck, and Mary Marvel, played by Brie Larson. Then for additional heroes on Batman's side are Nightwing, played by Zac Efron, Plastic Man, played by Jerry Trainer, Omen, played by Zoe Deutsch, Huntress, played by Evangeline Lilly, Captain Marvel, played by Nathan Fillion, Mara would be played by Emily Van Camp, and Supergirl. Now, I thought of a bunch of ways I could really make this a Superman film instead of him just being on the side of good and being the main protagonist, and I thought of a perfect way. The twist of the story is that Cyborg met something in deep space, and it wasn't this Technus thing as originally thought. It was, in fact, Brainiac, played by Daniel Bruhl. He used Cyborg to help him find the last children of Krypton and eventually take Earth as a part of his collection. So, the final act of the film is all the heroes teaming up to eventually fight Brainiac, with obviously a focus on Superman as it is his story. He is eventually defeated, and everyone is once again on good terms with each other. Because in the actual Civil War, we knew that they were going to kiss and make up anyway, so why delay the inevitable, right? So just fucking have it in this movie. It's fine. Thank God for another easy one with the Doctor Strange counterpart, Dr. Fate in 2016. Since Doctor Strange was essentially a ripoff of Dr. Fate anyway, it seemed like this one was an easy one. Sorcerers who answer to supreme beings to stop the world from plunging into chaos. Seems easy enough. The casting is also relatively easy, as Benedict Cumberbatch would be a good fit for Dr. Fate, so I will include him here. And with Dr. Fate's love interest in the comics, Inza Kramer, she would be played by Rachel McAdams. Then the villain wasn't terribly difficult because, similar to the original film, it would just be Dr. Fate, but evil! And then there is a character just like that. He's literally called Anti-Fate, so Mads Mikkelsen would just play him. Pretty easy to me. There isn't really a ton of supporting characters for Dr. Fate, but I think the only one that I could do is Ian Karkull and make him the Mordo of this universe, just so I could have somebody that could fit into that character for other films, even though Mordo has had almost no follow-ups after the ending of the first one, but oh well. He would be played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. For Dormammu, I think the best thing I could do is an encapsulation of the Lords of Chaos, and just like in the actual film, he would be played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Another fairly simple one with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Omega Men 2 in 2017. Another sequel, so let's get into it. The additions this time around would be the counterparts for Yondu, Nebula, and Mantis. The closest I have for Yondu is a character named Chantel, who can produce arrows from her body. Just on that alone, there is a similarity there, but she would be played by Palm Clementif. Then for Nebula, well, there's a character named Nebula on the Omega Men, but she wouldn't be named that until after Invasion, so here she would go by her original name, Felicity. She has next to nothing in common with MCU Nebula, so I will combine her with the character of Arton, who is an android just like Nebula. Then finally for Mantis, the only one that would kind of work is Darkfire, since I think Tamaranians control their powers through their emotions, unless that was only a TV show thing. But in that case, it kind of works, right? When it comes to the Omega Men, I really gotta grasp at straws. I'm really trying here. He would be played by Sean Gunn. The Viceroy would be the villain, and he would be played by Michael Rooker. Then for the Spider-Man Homecoming counterpart, The Flash in 2017. It is pretty loose, but I feel there are more similarities than you think. Plus, this was already teased back when I was talking about Justice League Amazo. Since we're dealing with the Wally West incarnation, he would be younger like Holland in the Spider-Man movies. I wouldn't want him to be in high school, but I think college would be a good fit, as he would be a bit more mature but still can kind of make dumb decisions. Plus, it would fit better with Holland's age at the time. On top of that, they both wear red suits and are more jokey heroes, while I think Spider-Man cracks more jokes and is more sarcastic, West could dish it out too. So I think that could also fit. As I've said, I'm trying to build a universe while also keeping in mind the proper counterparts, so I think I'm doing a decent balance here. Holland would obviously return as Wally West. Then there would be Iris West, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, Linda Park, played by Lana Condor, and for the quote-unquote guy in the chair, it could be multiple things. We could introduce Bart Allen here, as he does kind of fit into the annoying comic relief that Ned is in the Spider-Man movies, but I think that would be too many speedsters, and introducing time travel here would be a bit too much. So I'm just gonna grab a nobody character as Wally's friend, and that would be James Forrest, played by Jacob Batalon. Then we have the villain. There isn't really a bird-themed villain fought by the Flash, but the closest thing I could do would probably be Manfred Mota, who was a scientist who met multiple incarnations of the Flash over time. The two reasons I'm using this weird, rather unknown villain is 1. He is all about evolving over time and trying to perfect himself to defeat the Flash. With this, it kind of ties into the idea of Vulture trying to evolve with the times and perfecting his thievery with advanced alien weaponry. It's a reach, but hey, it's something. And then 2, he is the father of someone who is the love interest of the main hero. Now, in the comics, it's Bart Allen's girlfriend Valerie Perez, but I'm gonna change it to Linda Park since in the fucking movie they changed Liz Allen's backstory anyway, so might as well do it here. With this, Manfred Mota is using the name Fusion with 2 N's for some reason. However, here, since Wally ends up with Linda, I would combine Liz and not MJ together, with Linda staying close to Wally. I would also want to have a mentor for Wally to kind of fill in that role that Barry would have left, so I think having Jay Garrick could work and have him be played by Carrie Elways. Don't worry, I have a plan for John Wesley Shipp later on, so hold your horses. Next, we get to the Thor Ragnarok counterpart, Wonder Woman Apocalypse in 2017. This is tough because Ragnarok is the Norse end of days. Even though the film really does not follow this until the last 2 minutes of the movie, I still want to stick close to that idea as much as I can because Taika Waititi sure as hell didn't. But the biggest problem is Wonder Woman and her background takes most of its inspiration from Greek and a little bit of Roman mythology. And the problem with that, neither has a big end of days prediction. Roman definitely doesn't, while Greek kind of has it with the 5 ages of man, with the final age being the Iron Age, where the gods destroy humanity after becoming too violent and greedy. But even then, there isn't a big overblown description like in many other mythologies. So I will take some notes of that while also using the period right before Wonder Woman became powerless in the late 60s and early 70s. So in this film, the villains would be Silver Swan and Cheetah, the Capitellas and Minerva versions who were introduced last film. Portman and Blanchett would return. They would discover Themyscira and attempt to completely destroy it due to a reason I will state later. The big twist, though, Ares has actually returned and granted them powers so they can destroy the Amazons to get his revenge on Diana while he destroys mankind as prophesized. There's a reason. He could manipulate their thoughts and make it something really dumb and make it super overblown, whatever it may be, but it's really Ares pulling the strings. Wonder Woman decides to save mankind, but after doing so and defeating Ares, realizes that Themyscira is almost vanquished. So she relinquishes her powers to save Themyscira and sends them to another dimension so that they can be saved from Ares' wrath if he ever returns. I Ching is introduced in the film to set up powerless Diana Prince, and he would be played by Tony Leung. Then for the Black Panther counterpart, it is Aquaman in 2018. This goes back to the idea of building a universe with loose counterparts. People have made fun of the fact that Black Panther and Aquaman have similar themes, concepts, and plots, so I decided to use that to my advantage. I mean, both are sons to powerful royalty who will gain the throne of a kingdom in which the world does not know that said kingdom exists, and because of their lineage are awarded superpowers. So that is what I will do here. Garrett Hedlund would return as Aquaman. Obviously, the villain would be Orm, played by Michael B. Jordan. Hey, if Patrick Wilson and Jason Momoa can technically be siblings, it could work, alright? Calm down. While you could make the argument that Black Manta would be the better villain, considering that he's black, I think that Orm fits into the role of the villain more, as it more so mirrors the actual film, with Killmonger being the foil for T'Challa. Here, Orm is a good foil for Aquaman. But I will tease Black Manta, and he would be played by Sterling K. Brown. Volko would be played by Andy Serkis. Jackson Hyde would be played by Daniel Kaluuya. Then finally, Tilda Swinton would play Atlanna. She is a bit weird for the role, but I think it could work. Then for the Avengers Infinity War counterpart, Justice League The Darkseid War in 2018. Yeah, this one seemed par for the course. Both have war in the title, and as Thanos started off as a ripoff of Darkseid, it seemed to make sense that the Darkseid War would be adapted for the third Justice League film in the case of this counterpart universe. However, it is a bit tough because the comic is really new at this point in time, but I think the timing could still work. Obviously, some stuff would have to be cut out, like the Anti-Monitor and having the universe been reborn many times, as well as whittling down many aspects and making it so Darkseid wins instead of him losing. The characters showcased in this film would be the entirety of the Justice League, Dr. Fate, Nightwing, Robin, Cyborg, Ocean Master, the Omega Men, some smaller supporting characters, and then Darkseid, with all respective people returning, and Darkseid being played by Idris Elba, as well as the new Green Lantern being added during the events of the film being Jon Stewart rather than Jessica Cruz, as that would make more sense. All the characters don't defeat Darkseid, he finds the anti-life equation and takes over the universe. The characters that are killed are Aquaman, The Flash, Dr. Fate, Supergirl, Hawkman, Zatanna, most of the Omega Men outside of Schlegen, Adam, and Tula. The ones that would become Darkseid's slaves are Ocean Master, Callista, and Cyborg. After the Flash dies, Jay Garrick would come out of retirement to help despite not saving the universe from Darkseid. Then there is the Ant-Man and the Wasp counterpart, Adam and Bumblebee, 2018. Just like with the MCU counterpart, this would take place before the events of Infinity War, or in this case, the Darkseid War, and be more so of a follow-up to Technis Imperative, as both Adam and Bumblebee were on the same side and became close. With this, they eventually start fighting crime together, but it's purely platonic due to the age gap. The main villain this time around would be Calculator, played by Walton Goggins. I'm not really familiar with Sonny Birch as a character, but since he's a small-time villain like Calculator, I thought to make Calculator his counterpart. Then later on, Ryan Choi's girlfriend becomes the villain, Lady Kronos, after discovering equipment that Kronos used. She would be played by Jennifer Connelly. Again, there wasn't really a counterpart for Ghost, and this was the next best thing. They team up to stop Adam and Bumblebee. A simple fare, just like the actual film. Then for the Captain Marvel counterpart, Shazam, in 2019. Makes sense as he was the OG Captain Marvel, nothing more to it than that. It would reintroduce the characters shown in Technis Imperative, with the superhero actors reprising their roles. The villain this time around would be Black Adam, as that would make the most sense, mainly because Captain Marvel's own race is already kind of the villain in the Captain Marvel movie, and since Black Adam is technically one of the champions, it kinda works. Not really, but it's the best I have to work with. He would be played by Kal Naga. The young versions of Freddie Freeman and Mary Bromfield would be played by Jacob Tremblay and Angourie Rice. Then Dylan Kingwell would play Billy Batson. The Wizard would make a small cameo and be played by Jude Law. Then for the Avengers Endgame counterpart, Justice League Endgame. There isn't really a contrary to the subtitle Endgame, so I used the same one since it kind of fits anyway. It would simply take the aspects of how Darkseid is defeated in the comic and used here in addition to the time heist featured in the MCU film. Everyone would come back, however it wouldn't be as epic as Avengers Endgame because they needed to find the stones and then bring everyone back and then fight Thanos. Here they just need to go back in time and fight Darkseid again and stop him from finding the anti-life equation. Maybe going on a bit more of a quest to find him in deep space and fight him there, so there could be some more bite to it. The time travel they use though is that they inhabit their past bodies as to not deal with the two versions of a bunch of different heroes, so there could be a bit of convincing to the people that died who couldn't come back to go off and fight Darkseid, as well as Jon Stewart not having his powers yet, so that could be a little subplot. Eventually, Darkseid is defeated and they go back to Earth. By the way, I also want Jay Garrick to sacrifice himself in this film, so you do have a mentor dying so that you can have that Iron Man dying equivalent used for the Flash's sequel film. And in this case, they wouldn't fucking kill off Batman, because that just... No. Meanwhile, the final counterpart for this video is the Spider-Man Far From Home one, which is The Flash 2, 2019. A sequel, and it is a simple one, thankfully. Everyone would return, obviously. The villain is another tough one because Mysterio doesn't have a proper counterpart, so we're gonna have to be real loose with this one. Even though he isn't really a Flash villain, maybe, possibly, the Shade could be good because he can cause illusion with the shadows he forms, kinda like Mysterio. Or, you know, we could just go for the most popular villain with Hunter Zolomon Zoom, since Zolomon in the comics was a friend of Wally, like Quentin tries to be, but turns out he's the villain. However, here, we have Zolomon being a genuine friend. This thing happens to him, but due to Wally not helping him, he becomes a villain. While it wouldn't totally work, Hunter Zolomon Zoom, I think, could just be used here, since I can't really think of anyone else who would work. In fact, I just realized something. Fuck that James Forrest guy. Just make that Hunter Zolomon so we actually fucking care about him in this movie. Oh my god, why the fuck didn't I think of that? I'm so smart. Also an idiot at the same time, but hey, whatever. So, cut that out. It's not James Forrest. It's Hunter Zolomon. Moving on. That's it for this video. Took a lot, but I have plenty more in store for you guys in regards to this series, so get fucking pumped.